This is the last seconds of a light sport aircraft that has just touched down when all of a sudden the nose comes up and the aircraft climbs again, almost vertically. It stalls, then spins into the runway, killing both occupants instantly. I'm not showing the impact, it's just too distressing. I'm not a fan of these sensationalist aviation accident debrief videos unless there's something good that can come of them. However, I have something to say about this particular accident that happened in the US 2 years ago, because it involved a sport cruiser, an aircraft I am very familiar with and one that this channel has been built around. This accident had nothing to do with the aircraft itself. In fact, the aircraft was a lovely example of a PiperSport, the exact same variant of the sport cruiser that I fly. It was well maintained and was being commanded by a very capable instructor at a large airport with excellent facilities on a beautiful day with light winds and endless visibility. No, this accident, like the bulk of most general aviation accidents, was down to loss of control. As you'll see, the physical cause of this tragic accident is pretty clear from the NTSB's final report, and it seems as though the aircraft was not to blame. However, there's some elements of the sport cruiser's control characteristics that from my experience could have been a contributing factor, and it's something that I worry about every time I take a new passenger flying. But we'll get to that later. So let's take a look at the background to this accident. It's late afternoon on Thursday the 8th of September 2022, and our story starts at a Santa Monica flight school where a 24-year-old flight instructor with over 1,500 hours flight experience and 1,100 hours in the sport cruiser has just departed runway 21 in November 126 Whiskey Kilo for an introductory flight experience to a 28-year-old athletic non-pilot whose family had said that he had shown no real desire to become a pilot, but he was the adventurous type. He had been given this experience as a gift. As is normal on an introductory flight, where there's a possibility the student may want to take his flying further, the instructor was sitting on the right and the student is in the left seat, or P1 side. That way the flight can be logged by the student as pilot under training. The sport cruiser has dual controls with the centre placed throttle, and so both occupants have equal access to the power and the flight controls, and each control stick has both a trim and a radio PTT or a push to talk switch on it. After a flight of around 35 minutes up the California coast and back, where the instructor demonstrated several different basic manoeuvres, they head back for a landing on the same runway they departed on. They join on the right hand downwind leg for runway 21 and they set the aircraft in landing configuration, with the flight instructor providing clear indications of the aircraft's position over the radio as they fly the traffic pattern, and he declares his intentions that this would be a full stop landing. They turn base and then onto final, where full flap is selected. According to eyewitnesses, the aircraft makes a normal approach. Around the time of landing, a transmission over the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, or CTAF, captured a low-pitched grunting sound, followed by the instructor screaming, "Let go, let go, let go." The grunting sound continued and the airplane pitched aggressively nose up and began to climb almost vertically with the engine at high power, before levelling off about 100 to 200 feet above the runway, flipping over, then spinning to the left, descending and colliding with the ground. Most of the airframe was consumed by a post-impact fire. However, the accident examination did not reveal any evidence of pre-impact mechanical malfunction or a failure of the flight control system. Damage to the propeller blades indicated that the engine was producing power at impact and the flaps were in a configuration appropriate for landing. Toxicology and medical examinations reported no issues with either of the occupants. So what happened here then? The NTSB, or National Transportation Safety Board, determines that the probable cause or the causes of the accident to be the pilot's inability to maintain control of the airplane during the landing flare due to the passenger's excessive control inputs, which resulted in the airplane exceeding its critical angle of attack and entering an aerodynamic stall. For whatever reason, the student has pulled his control stick back as the aircraft landed. It's impossible to know whether this was done because the instructor had allowed the student to attempt a landing and he messed it up, or it is the student accidentally pulled the stick back, maybe he caught some clothing on it, or as I'll show you, had his feet tucked back towards the seat. But again, unlikely. Or the passenger just froze and grabbed the stick in fear as they arrived on the surface. With both occupants dead, we'll never know. It seems pretty clear cut that the passenger was the one in physical control of the aircraft at the point of landing, and it was his actions or the inability of the instructor to wrestle back control that caused this tragic accident. So as the aircraft was in perfect working order, why do I say the aircraft design has some contributory factors to this accident? Well, anyone that has flown a sport cruiser, and especially a PiperSport variant, will tell you that they are super sensitive in pitch. This is due to the very large elevator for the aircraft's short length, along with the very long control stick. The designers of the sport cruiser opted to have a long control stick that bends around the seat, meaning that you have a large lever arm which results in little feedback, making it very easy to over-control the aircraft. The elevator is so powerful that in flight you hardly have to touch the stick and the aircraft will climb and descend quite dramatically. Look what happens with just a tiny trim change.
Yeah, so we are flying nice and level. Watch. One dab. Right, that aircraft was in trim.
As well as that sensitivity affecting the aircraft during flight, it's in the takeoff and landing phases that new pilots sometimes struggle. They can over-rotate on departure and over-control in the landing flare. It's not unusual to see even seasoned sport cruiser pilots get into a slight oscillation when landing. I've even done it myself when bouncing on landing, and so I would never allow a new passenger to manipulate the controls in such a critical phase of flight. In later versions of the sport cruiser, they tried to address this sensitivity by adding an anti-balance tab to the rear of the elevator. This moved in the opposite direction to the control surface, adding some weight and feel to the pitch control, although it only partially addressed the issue. I've also had passengers rest their hands on the controls and accidentally push the electric trim buttons on the top of the stick, making a last second trim check an absolute must.
So the trim controls, it's all electric trim on the Sport, and the trim controls are on the top of each of the control columns. And it's back for nose up, forward for nose down, left to roll left, right to trim right, left to trim left, right to trim right. There's only one trim tab and it's on the right or the starboard aileron. Now what can happen, and I've had this happen before, is that someone that's not used to flying, or even now I've actually had it with other pilots, that they lean against here, and this button is really sensitive. This button here is really sensitive, and you just need to lean against it. Maybe if you're resting your hand on the control column or whatever, you can really just touch that button and it'll be out of trim, which is why I always do the trim check literally the last thing that I do before I take off. So just making sure that doesn't happen. But yeah, I've been going taxiing along, chatting away with my passenger, and it's only because I've double checked. This can happen actually after you've been through the checklist. So it's important to do that double check, especially if you're with someone. Well, you should do it anyway, but especially if you're with someone that could have potentially pushed the trim.
There's also another problem I've noticed with the cockpit controls, and that's if you push your feet back tight against the control bar which runs along the floor of the cabin, you can affect the ability to move the control stick. Look at this.
Okay, I'm going to show you something else now, and it's going to be quite difficult, but I want to have a look at my feet. So if I put my feet against the control column, the bar that I was showing you, so if I push them back, look, we are climbing. If I release the pressure, push it forward again, so we're nice and level. If I push my feet back, look what happens. We're climbing.
I will always ask new passengers to keep their feet clear of the pedals, especially during takeoff and landing, and I've had them tuck their feet hard back against the control bar, thinking that they're being helpful, only to find I struggle to control the aircraft. So I want to show you this on the tail of the PiperSport, which is exactly the same aircraft as the accident aircraft. So on our PiperSport, this is the elevator, and it's a big surface area. It's physically got a big surface area to the size of the aircraft. Plus the aircraft is really quite short. So this is super powerful. You can see on the back the trim tab that's on here. And that's what trims the aircraft. And again, why it's so powerful, because it's so big. It's pretty much what, 2/3 of the length of the actual elevator. So it's actually really powerful. So as they were coming into land, I would imagine the elevator should be somewhere in this position. So it's a slightly nose up. So it would have been somewhere around here. And then as they flare, literally it's that much. But what happened with them was that as soon as they'd landed and the wheels had touched down, the stick was forced back. Now look at that deflection, it's massive. And it would have thrown the nose immediately, well it did, it threw the nose immediately up into the air. And I think, caught by surprise, the instructor has then added full power, because he's got access to the power. He's added full power, and then hopefully the guy will let go. But he doesn't, he holds it there. The aircraft ends up going up, literally straight up on its tail, runs out of steam. No matter how much power you put on it, it's going to run out of steam at some point. And then it's only going one way. So absolutely terrible, but this doesn't help, you know. And it's not the reason for the accident. I'm not saying it's the reason at all. What I'm saying is that it's a contributory factor.
Golf Charlie Zulu, short final, runway 0 right. Surface wind 100 degrees, 7 knots. Charlie Zulu. Okay, so we've got a light wind. Gone down to a landing flap now, a full flap. Lots of drag. So you can see from the elevator, there's not lots of movement, just little bits as we're coming down. There's lots of birds on the runway, so if they don't move out of the way. There you are, nutters.
My heart goes out to the families of the two young guys who lost their lives in this most tragic of accidents. Thank you so much for watching. Fly safe and short field out.